Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Anne-Marie Butler. I'm the President of the Agricultural Science Association, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar this evening, The Future of Farming is in the Soil. We're delighted that so many could join such large numbers. So thank you for taking the time on this mild Wednesday evening to join us. It's great pleasure to be here with you this evening. From an ASA perspective, we continue to offer all our members and hopefully new members lots of activity across the year. We do hope everyone is keeping well at this continuing challenging time, but we certainly take comfort in the fact of talks of lots of vaccines and an improvement in the months ahead. But for now, we'll continue with the virtual, and we're delighted, as I said, that so many could join us tonight. As you're aware, this event will carry IASIS points. Barbara in our office will keep the list of all those in attendance and will follow up on those IASIS points. So we're delighted to be able to offer those points for the event this evening. From an ASA perspective, we are delighted to have our members and also delighted that we have so many non-members here with us this evening. We're delighted that next week we will be launching a new array of member benefits, so certainly exciting for the ASA. So please do keep an eye on our social media and lots of planned advertising and messaging. So there's lots of new benefits there, which they're looking for everyone. And finally, our podcast goes out on a monthly basis. Please do take the time to visit the podcast if you haven't. Each month we have one new podcast member who talks to us about their events and things from life. So all are welcome, and that streams on Spotify and Apple and all the places where you get your podcasts. Tonight, I would certainly like to welcome Robbie Byrne from Precision Nutrition, Gareth Colligan, tillage farmer from Louth, and Fiona Brennan from Teagasc Downstown Castle. It promises to be a great event, chaired by Council Member Siobhan Walsh. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Siobhan for all of her work in organising this event and all the time that has gone in with speakers. We certainly appreciate it. The Q&A function is available, so you can post your questions right throughout the event. So enjoy the evening, relax, and I'll hand over to you, Siobhan. Thank you.
Thanks for the introduction, Anne-Marie. So hello and welcome everybody, and thanks for joining the webinar this evening. So I suppose I'll just go through the running order. So Fiona Brennan from Teagasc is up first, and then we have Gareth Culligan from Louth and Robbie Byrne from Precision Nutrition. And at the end of each speaker, or at the end when all three speakers have finished, we'll go through questions and answers. So we'd encourage you very much, as Anne-Marie said, to put your questions into the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen, and hopefully there's plenty of questions, and we'll give as much time as we can to get through as many as possible. So as I said, Fiona Brennan is up first, and Fiona, I might give you an introduction there while you share your screen. So Fiona is a research officer in soil and environmental microbiology at Teagasc Downstown Castle. And Fiona has also worked in NUI Galway and the Hutton Institute in Scotland. So Fiona, your screen is up there now and working, so I might leave it to you.
Great, thanks very much, Siobhan, and it's a pleasure to be here today to talk in this discussion about soil. Hope everyone is well. So my talk today is going to focus on the importance of soil, its many functions, and how we assess and can enhance soil health. When we think of the resources that underpin our agri-food system and sector, there's probably nothing as important or as fundamental as soil. It underpins literally everything. It is the foundation on which the sector is built. And it's incredibly important, not just for agriculture, but for broader society. Sorry, I'm just clicking on my slides there, but they're not moving. Oh, there we go. Okay, so soil is multifunctional, and a range of functions we rely on soil for that are essential for life on the planet. First and foremost, it provides our food, our fibre, our fuel, and 95% of our food comes directly or indirectly from soil. So obviously it's very important in terms of sustaining human populations, but it's also the largest terrestrial store we have. Has more carbon in soils than there are in the atmosphere and forests combined. And obviously from a climate change perspective, we want to keep that carbon stored in soil and not released to the atmosphere where it can cause climate change. And further, there is some opportunities depending on how we manage soil, to sequester more carbon into that soil and result in a net loss of carbon from the atmosphere and removal into soils. They clean and purify our waters. They're also a really important store of water. So they, when it's not raining, they hold on to water, provide it for plants. And when there is an abundance of water, we also rely on soils to manage that water in a way that avoids flooding. Further, it regulates our climate. It takes carbon from the atmosphere through photosynthesis and stores it in our soils. And also there's a lot of nutrient cycling happens in soil, some of which transforms carbon and nitrogen into gaseous forms, which can result in the release of greenhouse gases. So what happens in those soils is very important in terms of the net balances of carbon and nitrogen and those greenhouse gases. That nutrient cycling is also important for the provision of nutrients for plants. Even in fertilized systems, quite a lot of the nutrients are coming from the soil organic matter pool, for example. It also recycles nutrients that come into the soil in an organic form. It's a really important store for biodiversity, a globally important reservoir of biodiversity, an incredibly habitat, storing over a third of all life on the planet is present in soils, with all the benefits and functions that brings. And tied to that, it's a real treasure trove for pharmaceutical and genetic resources, including medical, such as antibiotics. Most of our antibiotics come from soil. So this is an example of the very many functions that soils provide. It's worth mentioning that many soils can provide these functions simultaneously. But their inherent capacity to deliver individual functions differs across soils. So for what I mean there is you can have a soil that's very productive, that can produce a lot of grain or grass, but its inherent capacity to sequester carbon may be less than another soil. And all of these functions are important. So how we assess soil health and how we balance these functions is something really to think about. On a global basis, our soils are under quite a substantial amount of pressure. They're essentially a non-renewable resource. It can take hundreds of years to form a single centimetre of soil, and it's currently being degraded faster than it can be replaced. In the United States, for example, it's been degraded about 10 times faster than it's been replenished. In China and India, it's about 40 times. Incredibly, we're losing about 24 billion tonnes of fertile topsoil every year. And this equates to about 12 million hectares of fertile agricultural land. And to put that in perspective, it's nearly twice the total land area of the island of Ireland. In terms of status, then, the majority of the world's soils are considered fair, poor, or very poor condition. 33% of our soils are moderately or highly degraded. And the UN estimated a couple of years ago that we had, at current degradation rates, about 60 years worth of viable topsoil left. Unless we think that this is an issue for other parts of the world, on our own doorstep, 60 to 70% of EU soils are considered unhealthy. So this is obviously quite alarming in terms of delivering those functions we rely on soil for. A whole range of pressures face soils. These include sealing, which is where we build on soils, where we take land out of agricultural production and we build either through sprawl of our cities or our towns, or even in rural areas. We can see sealing where we put concrete on soil and thereby lose its function. We have compaction, where we squeeze soils, compress them, removing the pore space, which destroys the structure, and also a lot of the biodiversity lives in the pores, so it has a very negative effect on those. And compaction is one of the main threats that we face in Ireland in terms of our soils. We have over-fertilisation, where too much fertiliser is applied, and we have cases where we're losing organic matter. Organic matter is being removed during production and not replenished. We have loss of above ground diversity, where we're growing monoculture crops. And this has a strong effect on the below ground diversity, the diversity of the biology in soil. We have pollution. We also have soil erosion, where we literally lose valuable topsoil from the system. And also the effects of climate change are amongst the threats that are of most concern. I suppose it's a mark of the urgency that this problem is causing the concern internationally in how to combat these threats, that we've seen a huge amount of activity at international level, developing mechanisms of trying to conserve our soils, to protect our soils from damage, and to preserve those functions. Within the EU, soil health is very much embedded within the Farm to Fork strategy, the Green Deal, and the EU biodiversity strategy. And also it has been marked as one of the 5 missions for the next Commission framework. So the next programme for the EU, one of the 5 main goals is around the area of soil health, a strategy called Caring for Soil is Caring for Life. And the aim here is to ensure that 75% of our soils are in healthy status by 2030, which is quite an ambitious target, but we're beginning to see a lot of activity in this area, all about protecting and enhancing our soil health. So we're talking about targets for soil health, but what exactly is soil health? The soil health, or the healthy soil, is a soil that has capacity to deliver those functions we talked about earlier. So a healthy soil is a functioning soil, and the function of the soil is reflected in its chemical, physical, and biological properties. These 3 aspects of soil health are completely linked and impact very strongly on each other. And also the environment that soil is in impacts its capacity to function and how we manage these soils. And of all the aspects involved in soil health, management is the one that we can really control, because your inherent soil properties and your environment probably can't be changed. So how do we go about assessing soil health? Traditional soil testing focus on the chemical properties of soil, the pH, the phosphorus, sulfur, potassium, etc. And these are still really valuable indicators and give valuable information about chemical health of our soils. But to look at the broader soil health context, we need to look at the other aspects. So visual assessments, where we visually look at our soils, can tell us an awful lot about how healthy our soils are. There's a whole range of assessment tools that look at the health or the structural health of our soils, including some developed in Teagasc, for example, grass spec or double spade method for tillage. And these are really, really easy ways of assessing the health of your soil. And the only tool you need is your spade and your eyes, of course. And you can tell an awful lot about a soil from looking at it, from its colour to its structure to its porosity, rooting architecture. It can all tell us a lot about the health of our soils. At the same time, we can combine this with biological assessment for larger macrofauna, such as earthworms. And that's a really easy way of looking at soil biological health. We can't look at all the intricacies of the soil biology because most of it is microbial and needs specialist techniques, but we can look at the function of our systems as an indicator of function of soil. So we can look at our crops. Are they healthy? Are we getting the same yields? Are we getting the same quality of crop herbage? Are we seeing our drainage, our soil or our water storage function operating well? Are we seeing ponding? Is the soils draining away? Can all tell us about the structural health of our soil. Also, processes such as degradation. If we put out if we put out organic materials, farm manure, are they able to degrade to the same degree as they would have previously? And are we seeing organic matter build up through colour, etc., in our soils?
That's 11 minutes now, Fiona.
Thanks. Just finishing up now. So what can we do to enhance our soil health? First is check in on your soil health. The soil is hidden below the vegetation usually. It's not something that springs to mind. But most farmers probably check their farm machinery at least once a year. it's definitely worth doing this for your soil and can really tell you a lot about how your whole system is functioning. Avoid physical damage by keeping your soils vegetated and avoiding trafficking when either animal or machinery traffic when soil conditions are unsuitable. And we can also try and reduce some cultivations where your system allows, and that can be beneficial for larger macrofauna. As I said, during production, we remove organic matter from our soils, and making sure that organic matter is replenished is very important. By whatever means you can, be it through returning slurries, manures, incorporating, for example, cover crops, crop residues, etc. And also, very importantly, making sure that as much as possible you have a living root so that you can utilize that photosynthesis to feed your soils in carbon. Try and diversify your crops as much as possible. Monocultures above ground or monocultures below ground. So you get much more diverse habitat for your soil biology when you diversify your crops. Your systems also tend to be more resilient against stresses like extreme weather events, pests and diseases. And finally, only use the fertilizers you need. Applying too much fertilizer can affect the diversity of your soil biology and negatively impact on function. It's also damaging to the environment. So making sure that your fertility is balanced and you're not applying excesses can be beneficial. One size does not fit all when it comes to our soils. We have a whole range of soils, a whole range of environmental conditions. So all of these conditions need to be managed differently. And what's healthy for one soil might not necessarily be healthy for another. So to sum it all up, our soil health is really our wealth. And they say soil, not oil, will be the resource, the primary resource in the future. Sustainable management is really critical to continuing to deliver these functions and to produce food. And farming for soil health is win-win. There's no negatives to having good soil health. It makes our systems much more resilient and much more sustainable. And finally, small steps can make a really big difference, and you can start adding up. Generally, step by step, improving your soil health will improve your whole system. And with that, I'd say thank you very much for listening in.
Thanks very much, Fiona. And look, that was a great presentation, very, very visual and very, very easy to understand. And I suppose the thing I took from it there is what you said at the end, is small changes can make a big difference. And you know, it's if you go out to your fields at the minute, it's a wet time of the year, and it's probably a good time to look at some of those things Fiona was talking about. You know, look for ponding in the field and get out and dig down with your spade, and you know, try and look at the earthworm activity in the soil and things like that. Look, if anyone has questions for Fiona, which I'm sure you do, get them in on the question and answers tab at the bottom, and we'll get to them by the end of the three speakers. So our next speaker is Garrett Culligan. So Garrett, you can start to share your screen if you want there as they introduce you. So Garrett is a very active member of Base Ireland. For those of you who haven't heard of Base Ireland, it stands for Biodiversity, Agriculture, Soil and the Environment, and they're a group of farmers who come together for the meet. At the minute, I think they're confined to Zoom meetings, but they also have plenty of field meetings and go to each other's farms and have a good discussion about different techniques on the farm. So Gareth is from County Louth, and is your screen up there now, Gareth? You had it a minute ago. So yeah, you'll have it there now. Yeah. So Gareth's from County Louth, and he's practicing direct drill. And he's been nominated for a Farming for Nature award, and he's very focused on sustainable farming, looking after his soils and reducing his farm input. So I'll leave it to you, Gareth.
No bother, Siobhan. Thanks very much. My name's Gareth Culligan. I'm a tillage farmer based in County Louth. Unfortunately, I'd like to thank Siobhan and the ASA for giving me the opportunity to speak here this evening. This evening I'm going to be talking about conservation ag on my farm and the techniques and methods I use to improve soil health. look at a little bit of the farm. The home farm consists of 130 acres. It's made up of light to medium soils. But rented and leased land is based between Slane, Trim and Shopland in County Meath, and is on heavier land. So look at I'm farming all types of soil. The average rainfall on the farm is 870 mil. Last year we had 920 mil and 950 mil in 2019. The main crops grown on the farm are wheat, barley, oats, beans and oilseed rape, mostly grown for feed. And then I grow small areas then would include camelina for oil pressing, combi crops, a pea and barley mix, and a bean and oat mix for feed. And then over the years, mustard and linseed have been grown for cover crop seeds. And then every year we try grow a small amount of sunflowers for the local football clubs for charity. Yeah, how it started. My father always had a keen interest in Mintill and would have encouraged me to look at other farming systems. So after a good few rousing debates at home, the change was made from a plough-based system to a Mintill system. At the start, there was a lot of problems moving from a plough-based system, but in hindsight, it was lack of knowledge and how to change. And this is where learning about soil health made these changes easier. As soil health increased, soil structure improved, compaction became less of an issue, and nutrients became more available to the plant. All these factors led to an easier transition to no-till. Farmers educating farmers is the motto of Base Island, and this is what has inspired me most to make the changes needed on my farm, and also the confidence to believe in what I'm doing. So these are some of the techniques I'm using on my farm to improve soil health. The three fundamental principles of conservation ag are reduced tillage, cover crops, rotation or biodiversity. All these principles have to be worked together for conservation ag to succeed. For example, when moving from a plough-based continuous wheat system to a no-till continuous wheat system, this will get hard to succeed because cover crops and rotation aren't being used. Other techniques I use in my farm include companion cropping, mixed varieties, soil and leaf testing, straw chopping and organic manures. And there are plenty of other methods such as composting, integrating livestock, multi-species grass wards and agroforestry. Let's start with reduced tillage. In 2001, I bought a Horsch CO4 tine drill to start Mintill. We would either use a grubber or a disc, and this was used to create a stale seedbed at the time. So eventually got away from using stale seedbeds and started direct drilling with the CO4, but it was still moving an awful lot of soil. On the heavier soils, a subsoiler was used to remove compaction, and this worked well in the dry year, but if conditions were not right, the subsoiler could do more harm than good to the soil structure. The drill came with a standard duet coater or duck's foot tine, which moved a lot of soil. This was changed to a single 1-inch tine, which moved far less soil, and this put the drill running at 10-inch row spacings, perfect for winter crops. And it was amazing how the soil structure improved by reducing tillage in a few years. Cover crops. The first cover crop I used was oats for spring beans. However, the single species on its own couldn't cover the ground for the winter. So sowing early and adding more cover to the mix made a big difference. And over the last few years now, we're using sunflower, buckwheat, phacelia, linseed, mustard, and vetch. And that's what you see in that picture there. That's one of the mixes we've been using. The price ranges from €10 an acre to €25 an acre. And these plants are from all different families, so each plant is doing a different job in the soil. The USDA cover crop chart is a great tool for selecting cover crops mixes. Rotation is one of the best ways of adding diversity to any farming system, and it's often underestimated how valuable it is in the farming system. This slide shows a spreadsheet of the rotation I'm using on my farm from the slide. I always include rented land in my rotation, even though there is a risk that land will be gone next year. And this rotation can change from year to year. Weather can always undo the best made plans. The spreadsheet makes it easier to see the percentage of break crops grown on the farm each year. And maybe this percentage could be part of an eco scheme where the more break crops grown, the higher the reward. Companion cropping. This is where 2 or more crops are grown together on the same field. Both can be harvested together, but one can be taken out prior to harvest. The first companion crop I tried was beans with oats. So oats were spread on top of the ground with the fertilizer spreader, and then the beans were direct drilled at 2 inches deep. The oats covered the ground first, and then the beans emerged. Eventually the beans outgrew the oats, but the oats smothered out any weeds. So since I started using the beans and oats mix, I haven't used any pre-emerge on my beans since. Oilseed rape with companion buckwheat and sunflowers is used too. So the buckwheat and sunflowers will winter kill, and sometimes we add clover with the oilseed rape, and the plan for the clover is to keep it in the next, to get the clover to grow through to the next crop for the winter wheat. We did this last year, and at the moment there was a lovely crop of clover, but it's disappeared at the moment. I think slugs or some beetles have taken it out. We've also done wheat with companion beans, and this suits the heavy ground. I think the beans really get down deep, get big thick roots and help with drainage. So, and again, the other reasons for growing the companion crops, it's adding more diversity to your cash crop and really just putting more roots in the soil. Mixed varieties. I started mixing varieties 4 or 5 years ago. So the idea of mixing varieties is that the disease won't spread through the crop as much. Look, when you walk a crop of wheat, let's say with mixed varieties, you can pick out the varieties. You'll see the varieties like Avatar with a low tolerance to mildew. And disease doesn't build up. If you had a crop of Avatar with mildew, it'd spread through it quicker than a crop with mixed varieties. This year there's a 6-way mix of Theodore grain, Conras, Costello, Dunstan and Loomis. The previous year was a 4-way mix of Conras, Costello, Dunstan and Loomis. So this year we just added a Theodore and Graham. And then again, at base are doing trials this year again on different varieties for no-till, and how to strengthen it. And the aim of that is to find a good variety that suits no-till systems. So, soil testing then. Soil testing will be done on this farm every 3 to 4 years, and nearly all fields are done with Albrecht samples. And this test shows the ratio between the 4 main elements that affect pH: calcium, magnesium, potash and sodium. When these elements are balanced, soil health and structure improves. These tests also show the total amounts of nutrients in the soil that are locked up. So by improving soil health and biology, these nutrients can be more available to plants. Leaf testing. Leaf testing is a guide as to what's going on in a plant during the growing season. Last year, leaf samples were done every 3 weeks. And this year I'm hoping to do it every 2 weeks. So in an average wheat crop, this will be 5 samples. The results will show excess or deficiencies. So the appropriate nutrients can be applied to balance the plant. And this will reduce fungicides and deliver, I will be using nutrients where they're needed. Years ago, we used to apply, every time we went out with the sprayer, we were told we were in a low zinc area. And we just put zinc into the sprayer, and that was the only trace element we're using. And now we're actually using copper, boron, a lot of magnesium, and it's helping with disease. Straw chopping and organic manures. Over the years, straw chopping in Mintill would have caused a lot of problems, but as soil health and biology in the soil increased, straw seemed to break down quicker, especially in the no-till with the straw on top of the soil. Chicken dung compost and mushroom compost and cattle slurry would also be used a lot over the years. But I started to cut out the composts and move towards invest in more cover crops. I thought for years that we could put on, like, let's say 10 or even 15 ton an acre of a compost on the soil. Actually, a cover crop will do nearly as much work in the ground. So the whole conservation ag system, like all these techniques have to be worked together as part of a system. I mean, you feed the soil a good, healthy and diverse diet. And again, it's all about biodiversity in the soil. So that's what you feed it, what fertilizers you use, compost again, slowly use a bit of everything. And reducing chemical fertilizer. But I think over the year we would have been using a lot of nitrogen. This has been burning out a lot of the carbon in the soil. And again, the reduced tillage is the best way to keep nutrients in the soil where they're needed.
Gareth, you're at 12 minutes there now.
Nearly done, 2 more sheets, thanks. Benefits of my farm. Look, over the years since we got into the further down the conservation ag journey, I started to reduce my chemical fertilizer. Nitrogen was the hardest thing to cut back on, and it's probably the one that causes a lot of harm. The higher the nitrogen I use in the farm, the more disease I bring into crops, and it's very hard to get a balance that way. Some fields now don't need any P&K fertilizer. There's 3 fields here now in the home farm that hasn't got P&K fertilizer in 7 years, or organic, and that's just down to cover crops, reduced cultivations and good rotations. You know, again, you look at the whole system, as the fields are further into conservation ag, the less you have to use in them. Also, pesticide usage has stopped. I haven't used insecticides now in 7 or 8 years on some fields. Pre-emerges are gone now on a lot of crops with the reduced tillage, less weeds, and I'm using a lot more nutritional products. Last year we grew a crop of wheat and we just had to use 1 fungicide on it, and that was because we had yellow rust. I just couldn't get it under control. And again, less machinery and less horsepower needed, so less diesel used is lower emissions. And I think, look, at going forward, any conservation ag system can compete with a conventional system. The yield might be lower, but when you look at the gross margins and the profits, they're just the same. Look at the future of conservation ag. I think carbon is going to become a commodity, a big change. At the moment, Irish government and private companies are paying massive carbon taxes. So a conservation ag farm can sequester between 0.3 and 0.8 tonne a hectare. So how do we work that into government? How do we work that into the future of conservation ag? Also, water quality is going to become a big issue, and I believe all the conservation ag practices will help with those issues. And probably the last thing, and I'll leave it at this, look, I want to leave the soil in a better condition than we received it for future generations. So I'll leave it at that, and thanks very much for listening.
Thanks very much, Gareth. That was a really interesting presentation, and I think the sign of the presentation is I think you gained a Twitter follower there at the end of it. And look, you hit a really important point there as well at the end, like the conservation agriculture, and Fiona mentioned it as well. You know, about carbon sequestration, and that's, you know, it's getting more and more attention now. And we saw Joe Biden now in America talking about paying the conservation ag and the regenerative agriculture systems. So look, down the line, tillage farming and the likes of cover crops and everything have a huge role to play in Ireland meeting its climate targets. So thanks very much, Gareth. And Robbie is on next. And now, Gareth, you've kept the time and Fiona's kept the time, so you've set a challenge for Robbie. So Robbie is from County Louth, and you can start sharing your screen there when I'm introducing you, Robbie. He's a current Nuffield Scholar investigating biological and regenerative farming systems. And he had set away on his travels for his Nuffield when COVID hit. Robbie farms at home in County Louth, and he owns his own business, Precision Nutrition. And I suppose when you see Robbie in a field, you're most likely to see him with a spade, probably going to dig a hole in the ground and see what way the soil is looking. So you can start away there, Robbie.
Thanks a million, Siobhan, and thanks to the ESA for the opportunity to come and say a few words. It's pretty much it's hard to follow those two, and if Gareth Culligan wasn't speaking, I'd normally be robbing some of his photos to make up mine. So I better get cracking, or we'll be here all night. Can you see that? Yes, you can see that. Can you, Siobhan?
Yeah, we can, Robbie.
Yeah, lovely. Sorry, just to recap on some of the points earlier. Because the big focus now is this EU soil mission, and it's great to see it, and definitely, in fairness, the Department of Agriculture in Ireland are really getting behind it. It's a funny one. This is the second attempt at it, and I think the first time a lot of people who are now understand the importance of soil and what it means to the future of the planet. The last time they tried to introduce a soils directive, it got a lot of negative press, which was unfortunate. At the time we could have been years and years ahead. But anyway, just to say on soil, it's not just one dimensional; it's connected. That's the way we look on it, and it's interesting to see some of those other missions there. It's all about healthy waters and climate neutral, and as well as soil health, it's including food. Just a quick one. Again, basically the Green Deal Farm to Fork and that soil mission. That's a picture of I suppose our big town beside us, Dundalk, or as Gareth Culligan and lads like myself knew it over the years, Fundalk. But that's the college just in the foreground. The interesting thing is, just up to the right of that, there's a couple of farms of cereals, and to the left of it, there was actually potatoes in the rotation last year. And again, it's just to say, soil and where we're going, it's not just for farmers anymore, it's for the communities, and we have to be careful to protect it and make sure it's not damaging other sides or parts of the ecosystem. And just to touch base, our current knowledge and research on soil science is we use this little example. We're only scratching the surface. It's like the tip of the iceberg. Modern agriculture for the last probably 60 years has been treating symptoms and not the cause, and that's not to say there was anything wrong with that. The wheel keeps turning and change keeps occurring, so it's good to see a move forward on that. So as I said, the last 60 years, even in soils and soil sampling, has been predominantly chemical. Now we start to see a recent move towards more even the physical and the biological, and one area that we won't touch on tonight, but it's that whole area of energy levels in soil. And I think we coined this phrase many years ago because it's something that youngsters in Louth do. You go for a pooch in places you shouldn't be. But that's basically an example of biodiversity in soil. And the 6 pictures on the right-hand side of that slide really show a farm in Wexford, one field and one farm in Wexford. 20-acre fields, so again, not very wide apart. And you can see the differences between them and soil structure. And we'll come back to that maybe later on. So again, what are we looking at with soil? A lot of people talk about measuring and testing and all this. So measurement definitely leads to better management. We're seeing that with the new focus on nutrient management and making more use of fertilizers to hit these farm to fork and Green Deal targets. So you can't really manage what you don't measure. But I suppose the key thing is, what should we be measuring? So much of that we don't know. We'd always try and say to farmers and advisors we work with, balance is the key, and that's just a quick example of one version of Mulder's chart. And sometimes, one nutrient can interact either positively or negatively against another one, or one can depress availability of another or increase availability. So just to touch on I suppose traditional education, and I think this is where the biggest change in the last few years has come versus, we'll say, what I think maybe future education style. So Garrett spoke at length about Base Ireland. I'm involved in an EIP project with Danu. Base are involved in one. Waterford IT have a fantastic conservation ag program as part of their syllabus, a full program on it. I try and always mention the Dakota Lakes Research Centre in America. I think it's really important. It's farmer owned to a certain extent and ties in with government research and advisory. So everyone's taking a sort of putting a bit of skin in the game. Who's rewarded for the knowledge transfer? There's a lot of talk of knowledge transfer over the last few years, and it comes to a lot of loot. And we're starting to see an awful lot of farmers actually transferring a lot of knowledge. So hopefully in the foreseeable future, we'll see rewards for those innovative people on the ground. Again, look, you mentioned me Nuffield project, Siobhan. It's a great opportunity to look into this in more detail and speak to some people, both Irish and close to home across the water in England and Scotland, Wales, etc., and then globally. So again, we see this as being a big part forward. You know, everyone coming together and looking at holistic systems of research as opposed to what traditionally was done was one-dimensional sort of stuff. Definitely, it's not going to be easy. It's going to take a fair push through. And I think the one famous soil scientist in the past from the States, he said, compare the books to what you're seeing on your farm, and if they don't tally, if the books don't add up, throw the books out. So this is one of the most horrific words used in the whole area at the moment. It's all about stakeholders. So I had a look around and see what's any images of stakeholders. So there's two good ones to get us thinking about it, because that's the way a lot of stakeholders have been treated in the past. And thankfully, we're starting to see that change a little. Here's a farmer from one of the EIP project farms that we're working with, Danu Dairy Farm or County Kildare, you know, intensive, milking in excess of 100 cows, well pushing milk yields, you know, good solids, and taking it multi-species swards. He's changing some nitrogen to foliars, and over the last year or two in the trial, starting to see 20-30% reduction in total farm nitrogen, and again helping to put that pressure back on what's coming, we'll say, from Europe to try and do the job a little bit better. That's just an example on one of the tillage farms. It's a microbrewer they used to make up some biofertilizers or mix some trace elements themselves. So I couldn't mention the Green Deal and Farm to Fork without Gary Zimmer is one of the old, what we call the grandfather of biological farming from America, Wisconsin. And Gary has a famous statement called "Earn the Right," and I think that's what a lot of people miss. We're probably be expecting someone to come and give us a magic bullet, and there's definitely no magic bullets. We have to get down and dirty on the farms, go for a pooch, see what works. We will make mistakes, we will have failures. Hopefully, if we can keep having more successes, we'll move on from that. Again, this is the new version of the new stakeholders. Tim Parton only recently announced last week as Soil Farm Innovator of the Year. In 2017, he won the Farmers Weekly Joint Prize for Soil Farmer of the Year. And I know Tim quite well, and the funny thing is, you know, Tim would tell you that the 2 or 3 big advisory and research services in the UK, none of them have ever bothered to come to him and see what he's doing. So you know, hopefully these new stakeholders are definitely changing that. That's, you mentioned Joe Biden earlier, Siobhan. That's Gabe Brown from the States. NDF, you know, because we started off tonight looking with these 3-letter words like ASA and that, and that's nutrient dense food. So Gabe has a good project running on that at the minute, and in fairness, they are getting sort of looking for extra funding to pay these farmers that are following regenerative practices, and hopefully getting there. So again, we spoke earlier about biodiversity, and this is critical, because it's not just one-dimensional with soils or plants or the universe. We're all in it together. We look at things like the environment. If we're taking, how would I say it to you? This was used at a recent Fertilizer Association meeting, used by the Department of Ag to show where some, you know, maybe areas of intensification and where water courses are coming under pressure. That's going to be a big element moving forward, and we're seeing that pressure coming from grassland and tillage farms. So this is an example of a farmer day we had in Wexford a few years ago, looking at a machine called Rainfall Simulator, designed by the USDA in America to actually educate farmers on soil health and conservation agriculture. And the interesting one, just quickly, is the soil to the extreme left is basically a forest soil. far less water getting through. We spoke earlier about this soil and organic matter being able to hold water. So it's really important that we look after it, feed it, nourish it, nurture it, try and improve it and increase it, not just maintain it. We need to really keep pushing that forward. That's just another example of something you do on farms, a little tabletop simulator, very easy to see some visuals on it. And again, just looking at different systems on a farm, you can see on the right-hand side, a lot more soil in the bottom of that basin versus the left-hand side. And it's just comparing different systems. Again, this is actually a photo from a different jurisdiction, but you can start to see it. You know, there's definitely a lot more soil ending up in water, especially after these intensive rainfall events. So it's something that's going to need more work in the future. Organic matter matters. That's actually a picture of that field we did in Wexford earlier. And the one on the left is from the hedge. The one on the right is from the middle of that tillage field. A very good, productive tillage field. But the big thing I saw in the difference in the numbers was there was actually 100% more organic matter in the ditch than there was in the middle of the field. What does that really mean for farmers and the environment? 1% organic matter, about €15 per hectare of extra free N. If we take 15 kilos at €1 a kilo, and 1% organic matter able to hold an extra 20,000 gallons more water. So with these more extreme rainfall events, it can soak it up a little to help. And then when we hit these drought periods, we seem to be hitting all the time. This is just one of the simple ones we spoke again about earlier. Earthworms, that's a well-fed boy. He popped up in RD a few years ago. And the whole secret here is, I suppose, what really are they doing for us? Well, it's drainage, it's aeration, it's actually what goes in the front end of an earthworm comes out the other end probably 6 or 7 times more bioavailable. So if 1 unit of nitrogen goes in front, it comes out as something like 5 or 7. You know, there's different numbers there, but it means there's more of it there. Secondly, some of the early research on the multi-species in UCD showed that, you know, under legume species in the multi-species, they were getting up to 7 times more earthworms. Pro-soil work in Wales, in Aberystwyth, showing, you know, when you start putting clovers and multi-species into grassland, water infiltration rates go up dramatically with some of those crops versus just straight ryegrass. So again, something to be conscious of. Carbon fertilizers, we speak a little bit as to farmers. How do we change from chemical fertilizers, which is now becoming a push towards it? That's an example of a local farmer using sort of an innovative thing in the last few years, chicken pellets, which probably weren't ever heard of really before. But the whole idea is, instead of just getting NPK with some of these organics, whether it's slurry, mushroom compost, microbial treat slurry, farmyard manure, you're getting more than just the NPKs. You're getting calcium, sulfur, carbon, magnesium, zinc, etc. And it's also food for your microbes and your earthworms. So and in recent years, in fairness, there's a lot of the new granular fertilizers now started to come with added carbon sources. So this is one of the key areas I think you'll see in the next few years, the liquid carbon pathway. Probably not spoken much about over here at the moment, but it is making traction in certain parts of the world. That's one of the first cover crops we convinced the fella in Louth to grow, apart from on our own farm. It was taken with one of those old little Nokia phones. It was before smartphone type. The difference in that soil, and again, if you sent that soil to a lab, you'd probably see a similar NPK, pH. So what's soil? Soil without a plant, to me, a living root, is really, it's only one part of the equation. So again, we need to get these plants in there. Those roots are growing down, as well as physically moving the soil and aerating it and warming it up and nourishing it. It's secreting these exudates and sugars to feed the microbes and feed through the root system, coming down through the leaves. So it's a win-win. Again, an example, a base farmer in Wexford, just a multi-species cover crop in front of tillage. The interesting thing from this point of view is, this is a tillage farm in Wexford that hasn't received any organic manures in the last 20 years, and by strong use of cover crops in rotation, they're actually increasing organic matters over the last 9, 10 years. So again, you can see the nodulation on the vetch and great roots there on the clover. Different root architecture, and that goes back to why we need different biodiversity with these plants. Again, this is actually from my home farm. It's direct drilled winter wheat into what was a lay, burned off a Roundup. So we're just testing this out. We think it's a good, you know, it's something worth looking at. And again, we just open up the soil, and it's really taking this water infiltration, loads of earthworms in it. There was actually a leather jacket in there and a few slugs, but yet they're all seemingly in balance. So it's not a major problem.
You're at 13 minutes there, Robbie.
Well on now, Siobhan. And again, just on that wheat, that's another one of these where we mix the varieties up just to help hopefully as part of an IPM strategy. And that's not to say that you might get away without using some of the chemicals, but maybe in a tough year you would. Again, we touched a little earlier on microbes. They're part of that soil system, and they're probably more important than most people give them credit for. So look, you're looking at things like mycorrhizae that help grow more plant roots. They also help with soil structure, aeration, drainage. Again, we talk about residue management, breaking down straw. So the key thing, are we feeding on microbes? You know, how do we encourage them? That's an example of a mycorrhizal treated potato plant from about 12 or 14 years ago. So again, a farmer's job, photosynthesis, really, again, you're trying to take in this sunlight, and it's doing a good job. It's taking in the carbon dioxide, fires it out as oxygen, cleans up the atmosphere, and puts some of those sugars down to the roots. We went through that a minute ago. So it's all about working that system. This is Soil Food Web, Elaine Ingham, USDA many years ago. Very innovative at the time. Probably, you know, it's starting to come to fruition that people are putting it together and making sense of it. So soil science, soil fertility, soil health, you know, there's loads of terms and conditions or loads of names. They're all far more complex than we can think, you know, and people up to now probably treat soil as quite a simple little thing, you know, we don't need to look at it much, but I hope now people are realizing it's a much more complex environment. We encourage people to keep an open mind, try new things, you know, have a look. And that's quite a good reference book if anyone's interested in it. I'm nearly finished, Siobhan. So this one is you know, there'll be a lot of eggs in the audience there, and I'm sure they recognize this picture. So it's a famous egg hunt, and copperface jacks. So I'm just going to give the background to this. And this opened up around 1996, and a great old buddy of mine, we rambled down one evening from the library in UCD. And he's since gone on to become a key policy maker within the Department of Agriculture. So to just show you, he had the brains at the time, you know. But we walked down the stairs to Coppers, and we took one look around us. And I think a lot of people like to say, I knew this at such and such a year, and I've been no-tilling for 5 years, or I've been doing this for 5 years. So 1996, we got to the bottom of the stairs. We took one look around. We were probably smoking 2 major cigarettes. And he just looked at me and he said, Robbie Byrne, we're in clover. So somebody gave you the benefits of multi-species many years ago. And if you think of Coppers, it's almost a perfect soil. There's loads of life above the ground, even more life below the ground. A great mix of chemistry, physics, and especially biology. Loads of symbiotic relationships, an odd wee row, which happens with the microbes as well. Loads of biodiversity, and lots of rotations. So that's me, Siobhan, Goramila Mayagwiv, and just to finish up on it, you never really change things by fighting the existing reality. It's a nice example to change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. So again, thanks for your time, folks, and if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks a million, Robbie, for that very interesting presentation. I think if I had seen that picture in my soil science lecture in UCD, and I might have paid a bit more attention some of the days. So a good example there at the end. So we'll ask Fiona and Gareth to come back on there now, and turn on their mics and their cameras there, and we'll go through a few questions. There's plenty of questions in here. Loads of people very interested, especially Gareth, and what you're doing on your farm. So I think I'll just go up to the top and we'll work our way down. Fiona, first one there for you. I think you referred to soil degradation, but I think that was actually the slide you had on the soil function. So I think you were referring to, was it degradation of the debris on the soil? Is that what it was?
Yeah, it's really where your physical structure disintegrates and your soil can either wash away or blow away, and your structure, your pore space and everything, it all crumbles. So it's no longer a living breathing organism, if you like. It's just dead. It goes from soil to dirt, if you like.
Okay, very good. Yeah. Let me see. So Gareth, there was a few questions on this. So how is the profitability of cropping on your farm now with all the changes you've made in recent years? So now we don't need your bank account details or anything, Gareth, but
which bank account do you want to see?
have you seen a change or an improvement?
Yeah, look, I won't say there was an improvement years ago. When we moved to Mintill, there was a reduction in yield, and again, lack of knowledge and experience. We made a lot of mistakes and would have lost yield. But as times went on, when we started to change the system and add cover crops and sort of more techniques from conservation ag into it, it sort of leveled out. Profits are getting better on the farm. Inputs are going down. Yields are not, I don't have great yields. My wheat, they're 4 ton, there's 3.3 on winter barley. Look, we have seen higher yields, but I'm cutting back my inputs. I think there was a question there on the nitrogen use on wheat and barley. I'm putting 180, we were on 180 units and we're down to 160 units on wheat now. And I'm hoping to cut that back more. On the winter barley, it was around 150 units and I'm back down to 130 this year. Now I'm using a lot more sulphur in that. Some of the crops are getting nearly 100 units of sulphur along with that fertilizer. So your costs, look at that, you're replacing, you're bringing back your nitrogen and you're putting up your sulphur. So overall, look at the farm it's able to compete against any conventional system, I think, at the moment.
Okay, very good. And there's a question there, Gareth. There's a few in there about graze and cover crops. So have you ever grazed them, or is it something you consider?
Definitely. We had a cover crop here, oh God, it's 5 years back at the house, and there was 10 species in it. There was a big mix. And it was mustard and it really took off. So we were lucky, it was a dry enough winter in December. We fenced it and there was 300 lambs put out in it and they were there for 4 or 5 weeks. And they made a great, I was always worried about the slugs. We were using, at the time we were using too much brassicas in the mix. And there was a lot of mustard in it until it's radish, a bit of everything, but the mustard had taken over. So we would have had a lot of problems with slugs. And we sowed, that year was actually camelina, spring camelina into it, and with no problems with slugs in it, due to grazing the cover crops, and it was easier to handle.
Very good. And you were leaf testing, Gareth. Someone's asking, where do you get this done? Maybe I pass this question off, do I?
He's on mute there. I think Robbie,
can you explain a bit?
Yeah. No,
can you explain a bit about the leaf testing?
No, there's a couple of labs in Ireland do it. There's a couple of labs in England. People send sample to, and there's a SAP analysis lab in Holland. So there's plenty of choice out there. I think the key thing is just try a couple. You know, don't. It's like everything else. It's a management tool. We've always encouraged people to do it because, as Gareth said earlier, sometimes you think you're using, because of historical references, a certain mineral mix or whatever. And again, this, if the current EU focuses on chemicals and chemical fertilizer, eventually it'll come to things like nutrition or biologicals as well, because they have to be used judiciously and correctly. So I'd say a quick Google would bring up a few labs for most people.
And someone who's starting off leaf testing, Robbie, what would you advise them to do? So like, when should they take their sample? Should they take it 2 weeks before they're intending to put on their first fungicide? Because realistically they're not going to be putting back as much as what Gareth's doing. Yeah. No, and look, we've had trials with UCD and Chagas over the years, and some years you get a good, we call it prescription nutrition. You start doing the leaf analysis or SAP analysis, and some years you get good results, some years you don't really get, so it's a mixed bag. But what we normally try and do is tell guys to take them or gals to take them early in the week. That means they're into a lab fairly fresh, and if they are being posted, you have to bear that in mind. But as I said, it's not an exact science. It just gives an idea. We've used it traditionally in the past, keep an eye on nitrogen levels, and we have handheld meters. They can be a little bit pernickety, is probably the word we use. But yeah. Okay. Early in the morning before the sun. Now look, if you talk about reality, what happens? Most people probably to do it when they think you're doing it. But that's better than a shot in the dark. That's the way we see it. Yeah. And I suppose make sure to take a representative sample as well. Don't just go out and grab one spot of barley. Go out and do like your soil sample.
Yeah, like there is some. Look, most of that SAP analysis was developed really for the glasshouse industry, but they have some nice data showing where they can keep nitrate levels within the plant, correct, balanced with other nutrients that, like, diseases like mildew or problems like aphids don't maybe become as big an issue. Harder to manage those things when you're out in field crops and the weather changes and stresses hit them. But look, we found, as I said, we've had some really nice results, and we've had some, you know, pretty average to poor results. But again, you're trying to just find what's working on the farm. And then we'd always say, look, you have to average things over 3, 4, 5 years. But definitely a very useful tool. And nitrogen to sulfur ratios we found very helpful over the years. So
Okay. Yeah, another tool, as you said.
But I just add another thing to that. I have a couple of years done at the leaf sampling, and you're nearly picking up on what your deficiencies are. So look at magnesium and boron and copper is the top 3 in our farm. And what I was doing then was trying to get out in the autumn with a bit of magnesium, copper and boron, just to bring things up and get a healthier plant. So then look at that, help with the aphids.
Yeah. Okay. Fiona, a very topical question in here for you. In your opinion, what's best for soil? Is it straw incorporation or establishing good, strong cover crops for reincorporation?
Right. So I suppose the thing to think about when you're putting in organic matter is not all organic matter is equal, and it probably does different things in soil. Straw has quite a high carbon nitrogen ratio, which can make it a little bit difficult to break down. It can have positive benefits for organisms like earthworms, but generally, at least in the literature, they indicate that you should kind of cut it down or mill it. I don't know if that's Garrett's experience, but to get an increase in earthworm numbers, you often have to break it down. But as it happens, I was listening to a seminar just last week from the British Soil Science Society, and there was a farmer on that talking about straw incorporation and some of the issues he'd had with it. But as he increased his carbon, a bit like what Gareth was saying, he was finding the straw was degrading much faster.
Yeah.
But I suppose the straw is just incorporating carbon. A cover crop has 2 benefits. I suppose it's a living root, which means it's feeding the soil through its exudates from photosynthesis, which can feed the overall soil biodiversity and create a range of a quantity and quality of exudates can change in the soil, which can be beneficial. And second, you get this leaf material, litter, falling on the soil surface, and that can be food for macroinvertebrates, earthworms. We had a demo trial in Johnston Castle where we were looking at tillage radish, for example, and every time we pulled up a radish, there was an earthworm hanging off it. They seemed to absolutely love it. But I think it depends what your focus is. So we know, for example, that if you wanted to sequester carbon, you're more likely to get it to stay long term if the carbon is going in through the roots as opposed to going in as residues, etc. So it depends. But if you're looking for structure, for example, if you wanted to relieve compaction, applying farmyard manure, which feeds earthworms that can aerate the soil, can be hugely beneficial. And one other thing I took from that seminar, which is actually free online for anybody who wants to see British Soil Science Society, in some cases, it's good to mix high carbon nitrogen or high carbon substrates with ones that have higher nitrogen in them. And they were finding benefits from mixing them together in keeping total carbon in the soil, because it's down to carbon use efficiency. So if the organism is using a lot of energy, a lot of the carbon, respiring it back to break down that substrate, less of it is being held by the soil.
Okay. Very good, Fiona. No, thanks very much. And I think that's going to be a lot of benefit to Irish farmers deciding whether to chop their straw now ahead of the scheme. Gareth, we have a few questions for you here. What type of soil organic matter levels are you seeing in your soil, or what's your goal, I suppose, or what you're trying to hit and maintain? But look, we know soil organic matter isn't going to shoot up either overnight. Like, so what levels are you at?
Look, we started testing humus levels, which are very low in the soil, and we stuffed down at 1% and 2%, and now they're up to 3% and 3.5%, which is like it's measured in humus in the soil, so not organic matter levels. that we've seen before. So it is rising, but it takes an awful long time, like to get chopped straw to break down. It takes years, you know, and that's the look at it. It's not a quick fix. There is no magic bullet to get your soil organic matter level up. So it's just going to be a slow process. And again, depending on the ratios, the carbon to nitrogen ratios of what you're putting back into the ground, how quick to come out, and what state your soil is in biologically, and how it's going to break it down. So I think, look, if you get different mixes in, if you get different carbon ratios, chopped straw, bit of cover crops, slurry, just a mixture of everything. Again, back to diversity, and it won't speed it up, but it will work quick.
Yeah. Okay. And a quick one.
Speed up, not a quick.
Sorry, I cut in on you, Gareth, there. The signal was a bit funny. Just a quick one for you. What rate of oats did you sow with the beans, or what was the ratio there, the two?
Yeah, the oats, the first year we did it was spring beans. So the beans, I think, was a 12 stone an acre, and we did, what was it, 6? The first year was 6 stone an acre spreader. Then the next year we moved on to winter beans. So that was up at 15 stone an acre of winter beans, but 8 stone an acre of oats, because the reason being the oats had to come through the winter lying on top of the ground. And then the third year we made a bit of a blunder. We went to 10 stone an acre of an oats, barley and wheat mix. And again, it wasn't a great success because the barley and wheat didn't smother out the weeds like the oats did. So I think 8 stone an acre of oats in the winter, and lower, if you're going to spring, you go for a lower rate, 4 to 6 stone an acre in the springtime, because everything's going to germinate in the spring, whereas the winter, you're going to lose a lot of seeds and they're just laying over the winter. So.
Okay. Very good. Fiona, there, one for you on the protected urea. I'm after losing it now, but I know you have a paper coming out on it. It was on, question was, yeah, so is there an issue with the enzymes that are in protected urea affecting soil enzymes? As research shows, the enzymes have a negative effect on soil enzymes, therefore soils can't take up background nitrogen. I saw Patrick Forrester deliver some of this on Friday. So what are your thoughts on that question?
So we've done some work on looking at the effects of protected urea on soil microbial communities and also soil microbial function. It's still a work in progress, but so far the initial results indicate that there was no difference in the abundance of bacteria, archaea or fungi in the soil. In terms of community composition, it looked quite similar across all of the treatments that we looked at. We also looked at functional genes involved in nitrification and denitrification. And for these, again, there didn't seem to be much difference across the treatments. When you apply an inhibitor, you would expect some effect on the nitrogen cycling population, because that's exactly what the design is, that it will interfere with the flow of nitrogen through the system. So we did see some of those, but we also looked at soil microbial function in terms of degradation, nitrogen mineralization, denitrification potential, nitrification potential. And so far it looks like there's not much difference across with the protected urea. So it seems like microbial composition and function is similar between the urea and one with protected urea.
I'll follow up there, Fiona, as well. There's one here, any issue with NBPT being a carcinogen and a chemical getting into the food chain? So you've tested this in the milk as well, haven't you?
Yeah, so Patrick actually just gave a seminar on it last week, so that they've been looking for residues, and it seems the compound breaks down extremely fast, as in it's extremely difficult to even detect it when you put a lot of it in. So it doesn't look like residues would be an issue. But they're continuing that work and they're writing up that manuscript, so it will be released soon. But that seminar is available on the TAGS website if anybody wants to see, which is looking at the residues and the performance of protected urea.
Yeah, it was the signpost webinar there last Friday, if anyone wants to see it. Robbie, question here, you mentioned mushroom compost in a slide. Does this need to be stored for a period before land is spread? Someone saying they've seen issues with sterilizing compost that might have a negative effect on the soil microbiome. Sorry.
A lot of, well, there are some people putting in sheds and giving it a wee turn and mixing it with other manures to sort of maybe adding it to things like chicken manure and that, just to balance it out or do that. Mostly what we've seen with it so far, it's not going out at massive amounts. You know, I suppose the ones we've had experience with, look, they seem to be well cured coming out of sheds, but you know, I think providing they're used at sensible rates, we haven't seen any big negatives to them yet. We do try and get people to think about, look, if you're continuously using one sort of organic manure, maybe try and get a wee twist, you know, change on it to because like everything else, diversity is important for that food source for the soil as well as just for, we talk about it with plants and soils, so it's definitely key for that. But I think most of the growers we come across that are using it seem to be very happy with it in part of the programs. You know?
Okay. And there's a question here for the panel, and we might start with you, Robbie. So how does the panel see measuring soil biology? As soils become more biologically diverse, is there a relatively simple way to quantify the shift in microbial, fungi and bacterial communities? Like, I don't think we need to be so specific measuring things. It's like you said, Robbie, go out and have a pooch, is it?
Yeah. Well, look, it's science keeps evolving, and there's nothing wrong with that. And you know, I think we have ones we have ourselves that are soil microbiometer. Looking at them over there on the shelf, but you know, to give a sort of a rough indication of fungal, the bacterial changes or whatever. But at the end of the day, you know, we tend to say to people, they really need to get the pH you know, right first, and maybe P's and K's indexes, and get look, cover crop again. A great example from that farm in Wexford that hadn't any animal manure in 20 years, and organic matters are rising because of strong focus on cover cropping. So look, we've tested for them in the past. There's labs in the UK, there's labs in Ireland starting to look at it. I find with somebody, sometimes you can have a pile of info and data, and I'm not saying it doesn't direct you in the right direction, but what does it direct you to? And look, the big thing in this, and we were delighted to see Fiona join in Teagasc, because it's the first time there was really an emphasis put on soils and soil microbiology in Johnston. Well, definitely on the soil microbiology end, which we'd have been talking about for a long time. So the reality is there's so much work, as I said earlier, we're scratching the surface, and you know, to be fair, there's definitely a massive shift in funding awareness coming from Europe, and farmers are being involved. And if you take examples like in the UK, Innovative Farmers and Agroecology, far more sort of break up groups doing smaller trials over a shorter period of time. And I think that's something that could be very useful here. To test out those type of tests and see what does it really mean. Like, there's no doubt about it, if you take that slide I put up showing the forest soil, that's a fungal dominated soil, and it's able to hold a lot more water. Now, is it because of all the leaf litter? I'm not, you know, foolish, I can make guesses, but it's a study in itself, and it's something we always try and say to farmers and advisors, go out and have a wee pooch, and you'll start to notice things and see things. And you know, sometimes we're so busy we don't have time really to dwell on things, and that's one of the things we started to notice when we really got on top of sulfur. And you know, and again, we have had some trials with Teagasc over the years on sulfur treatments, looking at plant health and increasing how would I say it, immunity. But so I've no doubt that if we can get balances right in the soil between fungal and bacterial communities, we have a chance. And we've seen that with some of the early adopters who've used certain biological treatments in soil, and as well as that fed their soil life, that because they can change it. It's, you know, there was a study done a number of years ago in Teagasc Kinseely on veg, and by feeding soil life, it showed a big increase in polyphenols in the vegetables. Now, there wasn't a big difference in yield response, but a big difference in polyphenols, and that was a published study. So again, come back to the new soil mission. There's a cancer mission coming out of Europe, and a people health mission. So polyphenols and things like that are going to have more impact, and there's no doubt about it. Change in soil microbiome populations can influence that. The problem is, how far do you go? And you know, maybe if a little change is good, maybe too much of a change isn't a good thing. And I think that's an area for the experts. I'm going to leave a lot of that research to Fiona over the next year or two.
Do Gareth or do you want to comment on that, or what do you think maybe is the easiest thing for someone to measure maybe Like, do they need to be taking all these different soil microbial measures, or like you've talked a good bit about it already, Gareth? Like, but what do you think?
Look, you start going out with a spade. You see, is your soil structure right for starters? Basic pH, and I think the Albrechts are a big part of it. On the heavier soils that are harder to direct drill and harder to get the structure right, if the calcium and magnesium ratios are right, they're definitely going to function better. They're definitely going to transition. It's going to be an easier transition to no-till if those ratios are right. Look at, again, you can look at bacteria and fungi tests, but at the end of the day, you can see, as Fiona said, the soil breaking, or the straw breaking down in the soil, how quick it's happening. And look, there's a lot of, again, poaching and observation is the main things.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to do. And look, that's what I found with doing the leaf testing over the years. I was going out, it could take me an hour to get a leaf test at early stages, but you're in the field for an hour concentrating on just one thing, and that's it. And you see an awful lot. I think we just have to really get our skills back as farmers.
Yeah, definitely. We need to be out walking and digging and keeping an eye on what's happening with crops. Fiona, do you want to say on it? Or?
Yeah, I suppose in our lab, of course, we are looking at those very specific techniques that can identify down to the individual organisms. But having the data known is not of use to a farmer. We have to be able to interpret it and also to link what organisms are there to what their function is. Because who's there is not sufficient information to tell you how to manage your system. Yeah. But I would agree largely with Robbie in that we need to get the basics right first. If you're a farmer, make sure the basics are right. And it's a case of, with soil microbiome, build it and they'll come. If you have your soil in good condition, it's a good habitat, the microbes you need will be there. So make sure your soil structure is healthy. Make sure your chemistry is balanced, and build in the diversity, do all the things that we know enhances soil health, and your microbiome will be there working hard for you. So we may eventually get to a stage where we'll be able to sequence in the field and a farmer will be able to utilize that information, but we're not quite there yet. But visually and looking at what we're already looking at, you can put together many pieces of the story.
Yeah, and like your soil tests as well, of course, 20% of our soils it's only 20% are at optimum fertility. So if everyone went out and tried to fix their pH and their P's and K's, that'd solve a lot of problems as well. Look, we'll wrap up the questions, but I might just ask another one to Fiona there, because it's topical at the minute, and I know you had research out on it there. Is there a limit to how much carbon a soil can sequester, and how much would it vary between soil types? So I know Teagasc brought out a paper there on heavy grassland soils a while ago, and there's certainly a huge amount of potential left to store in our soils.
Yeah, so it's actually a very good question, and yes, different soils have a different capacity to store carbon. If you can imagine somewhere like a swimming pool and somewhere like a teacup, and there comes a stage where the soil is full with carbon and you can't put any more in. And this is something, like, there's a lot of discussion about carbon sequestration and increasing carbon in our soils. We mustn't forget that our soils already have substantial stores of carbon, which is absolutely fantastic. But the discussion firstly needs to focus on keeping those stores. If we lose those stores, it could be extremely damaging in terms of our efforts in climate change. So maintaining those stores has to be the top priority. And then if we can get more carbon into it, great. But there is a lid on how much we can actually pack in. So once we get to that point, we won't be able to put in more. But there is a big difference between different soil types, a clay soil and a sandy soil. But if we look at the international basis, how much carbon are in our soils, our capacity to put more carbon in could be a lot less than a soil maybe in Europe that's at a very low carbon level, because its tank is pretty much empty. So they can fill up more if you like.
Okay, thanks very much, Fiona. Look, I think we've grilled our panel enough. We've got through. We've done the 20 questions, and we could have done another 20 or more. So look, thanks very much to the panel, and not only for answering the questions, but for the really informative and interesting presentations that you gave. And I know a lot of work went into those presentations, and I think, you know, it's a sign of we've a great audience tonight, and that's a sign of the speakers that we had. So we really appreciate your time and your effort. And with that, I'll bring Anne-Marie back on to close the conference. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thank
you.
you.
Siobhan.
Siobhan, thank you very much. Again, just to reiterate a sincere thank you to Fiona, Robbie and Gareth and Siobhan for taking the lead in organising this great event. As Siobhan said, we've had super numbers in attendance, and I would think tonight was a record number of questions, lads, so everyone was high in demand, so thank you to everyone. Just for a few queries that were in, this event was recorded and will be available on our website over the coming days, and the slides will also be available, so just keep an eye on the ASA website. I certainly have learned an awful lot. I certainly smiled with the throwback to Coppers, Robbie. As the rain is beating off the window here in Kilkenny, it certainly brought back smiles, and hopefully someday we'll all see Coppers again if they'll have us in. There was lots of great ones, as I said, from swimming pools to teacups, leaf analysis, and something there for everybody. So well done to all. As I said at the start, from an ASA perspective, look, we're delighted to be able to bring these events safely into everyone's kitchen or sitting room or living room, bedroom, wherever you are. If anybody would like to become an ASA member, we're always open to welcome people. So do get in touch with Barbara. Thank you to Barbara, who is on the controls here and keeping us all screens. So thank you very much. As I said, the rain is beating off the window here in Kilkenny. We look forward to seeing a bit more spring around us. We were just chatting about it before we came on air. But for everybody else, please stay safe and stay well. Stay in touch with the ASA. If you have any other events that you would like us to run, please do drop me a line or into the office, because we certainly want to be able to bring topics to people that they're interested in. So again, Fiona, Robbie, Gareth, Siobhan, thank you very much. And for everybody else, have a pleasant evening.